My ex-husband's new wife stood at my door with a greedy smile and said, "We're here to claim what's rightfully ours. Hand over your home." I stepped aside, letting my attorney walk past me, holding documents that made her face go pale. It was a regular Tuesday morning when the knock came. I wasn't expecting anyone. In fact, I hadn't expected much of anything lately, as my life had been quietly unfolding into something I couldn't have imagined months ago. The familiar sound of the doorbell echoed through my house, a simple, unremarkable noise that instantly sent my heart into overdrive. I opened the door without hesitation, half expecting it to be the mailman, or perhaps one of my neighbors coming over to borrow something. Instead, standing there in the cold morning light was a figure I knew all too well. Olivia, my ex-husband's new wife, stood on the doorstep with a grin on her face. It wasn't the kind of smile you'd expect from someone simply visiting. No, this was something more, something smug, something calculated. She was flanked by a man who looked like he belonged in a courtroom, not at my front door. His dark suit was impeccable, his tie pressed perfectly, but it was his eyes that stood out, the icy gaze of someone who was used to getting what he wanted. This wasn't a social call. This wasn't an apology. "Good morning, Emma," Olivia said, her voice sugary sweet, a sharp contrast to the steel in her eyes. "We're here to claim what's rightfully ours. Hand over your home." Before we jump into today's story, I just want to express my gratitude for your support. If you're inspired by tales of resilience, justice, and personal triumph, don't forget to hit subscribe. It's free and allows us to continue bringing you these powerful stories. Let's get started. The words hit me like a slap across the face, so sudden and brutal that for a moment I couldn't process them. What was she talking about? My home? My children's home? I stared at her, disbelief taking over. The words didn't seem real. They shouldn't have been real. My life had already been turned upside down when Jason left me for Olivia, but this was something else entirely. How could they be here making demands, acting as if they owned the very place that had been my sanctuary for years? "Excuse me," I managed to say, my voice trembling, though I couldn't tell if it was from fear or the sheer audacity of her statement. Olivia stepped forward, the lawyer following her closely. She looked at me, her smile unwavering. "You heard me. We've come to take what's ours. You know, Jason and I deserve to have everything he worked for. And right now this house is a part of that." A cold knot tightened in my stomach. I had heard about the plans they had, but I never expected them to be so bold, so public in their attack. Jason had made it clear through his actions that he no longer saw me as his equal. But this was a whole new level of disrespect. They had crossed a line. I didn't know what I expected from Olivia, but I didn't expect her to be this relentless. She had always been the one to play the victim in front of Jason, the one who played the poor me card, and now here she was standing on my doorstep with a lawyer, demanding that I hand over my life. But I wasn't just going to stand there and take it. I wasn't the same woman I had been when Jason walked out on me. Oh, I had grown. I had learned, and most importantly, I had a plan. A plan that I would finally put into action. I stepped aside, my hand brushing the door open slightly, and without a word, let my attorney step past me into the room. The expression on Olivia's face shifted instantly. The smile faltered just for a moment, but it was enough for me to notice. She was no longer in control. My attorney, Sarah, was holding a thick stack of legal documents in her hands. As she walked in, I saw Olivia's eyes flicker from Sarah's face to the papers. Her smug confidence started to unravel, and I felt a flicker of something deep within me. Satisfaction, maybe even relief. This wasn't going to be as easy as Olivia thought. "Sarah," Olivia said, her voice suddenly lacking its usual flair. "What is this?" Sarah didn't reply right away. She just handed over the papers, which Olivia took reluctantly, her fingers trembling as she flipped through them. Her face went from confusion to panic in a matter of seconds. The color drained from her cheeks as she read through the documents, each word sinking deeper into her mind. The lawyer beside her stiffened, his eyes darting between Olivia and the papers in her hands. "What is this?" Olivia asked again, her voice now edged with uncertainty. I didn't need to answer. Sarah, calm and collected as ever, spoke up. "These are the papers that prove legally that this house is still mine, and Jason's attempts to transfer ownership have been nullified." "You're not getting it, Olivia." For a moment there was silence. Olivia's eyes narrowed, her fingers still gripping the papers with a mix of desperation and disbelief. The lawyer next to her glanced at her as if waiting for instructions, but Olivia didn't move. "I don't believe this," she muttered under her breath, barely audible. Her eyes flicked back to me, and in that moment I saw it. The same arrogance that had fueled her rise in Jason's life, the same self-assuredness that had led her to believe she could take whatever she wanted, was faltering. You can't do this," she said, her voice rising. "Jason will never allow this. I cut her off, feeling the weight of the moment finally begin to sink in. "Jason isn't here, Olivia. And honestly, I don't need his permission to stand my ground. You're not taking this house. You're not taking what's mine." The words tasted like victory on my tongue. I had been living in this moment for months, and now it had finally arrived. The anger that had simmered inside me for so long, anger at the betrayal, the lies, the years of feeling powerless, was boiling over, but it wasn't directed at Olivia. It was directed at the entire situation that Jason had dragged me into. "Leave," I said, my voice now steady. "I don't want to see you here again. This is over." Olivia's face twisted in frustration, her earlier confidence shattered. But before she could respond, Sarah stepped forward, her hand holding a final piece of paper that would seal their fate. "Unless you want to make this more difficult for yourselves," Sarah said coolly, her voice cutting through the tension, "you'll leave now. Otherwise, we'll be taking this to court." Olivia didn't reply. She just looked at the papers one last time, and in that fleeting moment I saw something I hadn't expected: defeat. It was brief, but it was there. Her smile faded completely, replaced by the realization that she was losing. She wasn't going to win this battle. Without another word, Olivia turned on her heel, the lawyer quickly following her. As they made their way out the door, I couldn't help but feel a strange mix of triumph and emptiness. I had won, yes, but at what cost? As the door closed behind them, I leaned against it, letting out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The battle was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, I felt in control of my life again. And it felt damn good. The door slammed shut behind Olivia and her lawyer, and a sudden wave of relief washed over me. The tension that had gripped my chest for so long was finally starting to loosen, but it wasn't enough to ease the ache that had been building within me for months. The victory, if you could even call it that, was hollow. It was the kind of moment where the battle felt like it was over, but the war was far from won. I stood there in the quiet of the entryway, staring at the space they had just occupied, as though their presence had left an indelible mark on the walls themselves. But the truth was, my fight had begun long before that moment. Olivia's smug face, that lawyer, those words they had said, those were just the final pieces of a puzzle I had been trying to solve for over a year. The past few months had been a whirlwind, but it felt as though my whole world had been turned upside down long before that. You see, Jason wasn't just my ex-husband. He was my partner, the father of my children, and for years he had been the center of my life. We had built something together. A life, a home, a family, and for the longest time I believed it was invincible. We weren't perfect. No couple is. But I had always thought that no matter what happened, we would find a way to make it work. That was until Olivia came into the picture. At first it wasn't obvious. Olivia was just another woman at one of Jason's work events. Someone he spoke highly of, someone I occasionally saw at dinner parties or school functions. She was younger than me, but that wasn't the issue. She was bubbly, friendly, and seemingly harmless, or at least that's how she appeared to everyone else. To me, she was just another face in the crowd. It wasn't until Jason began working late more often, making excuses and being distant, that I began to notice things shifting. I remember the first time he came home with a cold demeanor, a look in his eyes that I hadn't seen before. I asked him what was going on, and he brushed me off with a simple, "I'm just stressed with work, Emma. I'll be fine." But I knew something was off. It was like a gut feeling, one of those instincts that women often have when something is wrong. Days turned into weeks, and Jason's behavior grew more erratic. I found myself asking more questions, digging into his schedule, checking on him when he didn't come home on time. The cracks in our marriage were starting to show, but I refused to acknowledge them. I loved him. I trusted him. I didn't want to see the truth. But when I found out about Olivia, everything changed. It wasn't like a sudden revelation. It was more like a slow burn, a fire that had been smoldering just below the surface, ready to erupt. I wasn't the type of person to snoop, but I couldn't ignore the signs. A text message left open on his phone, an unfamiliar number in the call history, a message that read, "I can't wait to see you tonight." That was the moment I felt the ground shift beneath me. At first, I didn't confront him. I wasn't ready to face what I already knew. I needed time to process it, to come to terms with the fact that my perfect life was shattering. The man I had loved for years, the man I had given everything to, had been lying to me. I felt like a fool. How had I missed it? How had I been so blind? But the truth was undeniable. Olivia wasn't just some passing fling. She was real, and she was embedded in Jason's life in a way I hadn't anticipated. She wasn't just another face. She had become his confidant, his companion, and over time she had taken the place I thought I held in his heart. When I confronted him about it, the conversation was everything I feared it would be. Jason denied it at first, claiming it was nothing more than a misunderstanding, but there was no mistaking the guilt in his eyes. The truth spilled out, and just like that, the life we had built together came crashing down. He confessed to an affair, a secret relationship with Olivia that had started long before I had suspected. My heart shattered. I wanted to scream, to lash out, but all I could do was cry. It wasn't just the affair that hurt. It was everything that followed. The lies. The betrayal. The cold detachment in his eyes when he told me he didn't love me anymore. The worst part wasn't losing him, though. It was losing the life we had shared. The family we had built, the home we had created together. And to make matters worse, Olivia wasn't some distant stranger. She was someone Jason had chosen. Someone who had come into my life without my permission, without any regard for the family we had raised. I had always thought that if Jason left, it would be because we had grown apart. That we would come to a mutual understanding and part ways amicably. But this wasn't mutual. This wasn't a peaceful separation. This was a betrayal, a gut-wrenching reminder that sometimes, love isn't enough to keep people together. And as the days turned into weeks and weeks into months, I had to figure out how to pick up the pieces of my life. I knew what Jason wanted. He wanted to move on. He wanted to forget the years we had spent together and start fresh with Olivia. And somewhere along the way he had made the decision that I was no longer worth fighting for. But I wasn't ready to let go. I couldn't. The idea of losing my home, the place where my children grew up, was too much to bear. I couldn't just let him waltz in with Olivia and take everything we had built. It wasn't just about the house. It was about everything they were trying to strip away from me. My dignity. My identity. My future. But what they didn't know was that I wasn't going to give up without a fight. I wasn't going to let Olivia's greedy smile be the last thing I saw. I wasn't going to let her walk away with everything without making her understand the consequences of her actions. The same way Jason had chosen Olivia, I had to choose myself. I had to fight for my family's future, for my children's security, and for my own peace of mind. As I stood in the doorway that morning, watching Olivia and her lawyer leave, I knew that this was only the beginning. The battle was far from over, but I had taken the first step in reclaiming what was mine. I had taken back control, and I was ready for whatever came next. I wasn't going to let them win. Not this time. The sound of Olivia and her lawyer's footsteps slowly fading down the driveway should have been a relief, but it wasn't. It was as if the weight of everything they had tried to take from me only grew heavier with each passing moment. I stood there in the silence that followed, trying to catch my breath. I was finally in control, but a strange emptiness gnawed at me. Was this truly over? Or had they just begun to fight for what they believed was theirs? I tried to push the thoughts away, to focus on the moment. I had won a small victory today, but there was still so much left to deal with. Jason's betrayal had shattered me in ways I couldn't fully explain. It wasn't just the affair. It was the life we had built together, the future I had imagined for us, all of it crumbling in an instant. But the hardest part was the deceit. The lies. The trust that I had given him so freely, only to have it torn apart by his actions. As the days went by, the weight of the betrayal settled in deeper. I kept telling myself that I should focus on the present, that I had to be strong for my kids, for my family. But every time I looked at the house, the walls that had once felt like a sanctuary, I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. The memories of our life together played like a constant loop in my mind. The laughter we had shared, the quiet moments we'd spent together, the promise of forever, now reduced to fragments of a past that no longer existed. Jason had left me for Olivia, yes. But there was more to it. He hadn't just fallen out of love with me, he had turned against me. I could feel it in the way he spoke to me after everything came to light. The coldness in his words, the indifference that had replaced the warmth we once shared. He didn't just want a new life with Olivia. He wanted to erase me from his life completely. And that, more than anything, was what hurt the most. I thought I had prepared myself for this moment, but no amount of preparation could have shielded me from the emotional devastation I felt. I spent days trying to figure out where I had gone wrong. Was I not good enough? Had I failed him in some way? The questions gnawed at me relentlessly, but deep down I knew the truth. This wasn't about me. It was about Jason and his own choices. I wasn't the problem, he was. And then there was Olivia. At first, I had tried to ignore her presence in Jason's life. She was just the other woman, right? But as time went on, it became clear that she wasn't going away. She had become more than just a temporary fling for Jason. She was his future. And that thought filled me with a kind of rage I hadn't known I was capable of. I could feel her eyes on me, her smug smile in every interaction we had, and I realized something. She wasn't just taking Jason from me. She was taking everything. My family. My home. My sense of stability. The moment Olivia stood at my doorstep with that arrogant smile, demanding that I hand over my house, everything clicked into place. This wasn't just a simple betrayal of trust. It was an assault on my very identity. She was trying to rewrite our history, to erase me from the picture as if I had never existed. But I wasn't going to let her. I had spent too long being the victim of this situation, letting Jason and Olivia make decisions about my life without consulting me. It was time to take control. But despite my newfound resolve, the emotional turmoil continued to plague me. I couldn't stop thinking about how Jason had fallen for Olivia so easily, how he had so effortlessly left me behind. There were moments when I questioned everything. My worth, my decisions, my ability to trust again. The doubts whispered to me in the quietest hours of the night, and I could feel myself slipping into the same spiral of self-blame that had consumed me when I first found out about the affair. And yet, amid the turmoil, there was a small, defiant part of me that refused to give in. I had been through hell. I had been lied to, betrayed, and abandoned. But I was still here. I was still standing. And that realization, however small, became my lifeline. The betrayal had hurt more than I could ever express, but I wasn't going to let it define me. I wasn't going to let it destroy me. One night, as I sat in the quiet of my living room, the weight of the situation finally settled on me. It wasn't just about Olivia or Jason anymore. It was about me. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my future. I had spent too long letting their actions dictate my worth. I needed to find my strength again. I needed to remind myself who I was, independent of them, of the life they had tried to take from me. I began to piece together a plan. A way to take back control not just of my home but of my life. I reached out to my lawyer Sarah, who had been a steady presence throughout the ordeal. Together we began to explore every legal option available to me. There were loopholes I hadn't considered, paths I hadn't thought to take. But as we sat in her office, poring over documents, something shifted in me. I wasn't just fighting for my house anymore. I was fighting for my future. I was fighting for the woman I was becoming, the one who refused to be pushed around. And then came the revelation that shook me to my core. As we dug deeper, we uncovered something unexpected. Something that had been hidden beneath the surface all along. Jason had been funneling money into an account with Olivia's name on it. It wasn't just a love affair. This was a financial betrayal. He had been making plans to leave me with nothing, to start over with her, without a second thought to the consequences of his actions. The revelation hit me like a ton of bricks, and suddenly, everything fell into place. This wasn't just about love. This was about power. Jason had been building a future with Olivia, one where I had no place. But I wasn't going to let him. I wasn't going to let him take everything from me. My home, my family, my peace of mind. The truth was, I didn't need Jason or Olivia to define me. I had the strength to stand on my own. The days that followed were filled with anger, frustration, and determination. I had spent so long being consumed by their betrayal, by the pain of what they had done, that I had forgotten to focus on myself. But now, as I dug into the legal aspects of my case, I realized something. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my life, my future, and my independence. Olivia and Jason had underestimated me. They thought they could walk all over me, take what was mine, and leave me with nothing. But they were wrong. I was ready to fight back, and this time I was going to win. The weight of the discovery about Jason's hidden financial dealings with Olivia didn't hit me immediately. At first, it was just another piece of the puzzle, another thread I could pull to expose the web they had spun around me. But as I sat there with Sarah going over the details of everything we had uncovered, it became clear. This was bigger than I had imagined. This wasn't just about a love affair. It wasn't just about the house or the betrayal. It was about power, control, and stripping me of everything I had worked for. Jason thought he could rebuild his life with Olivia while leaving me with nothing. But he was wrong. The revelation about the secret account was a game changer. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the intention behind it. Jason had been siphoning off funds, making sure that when everything crumbled, Olivia would have a comfortable nest egg, and I would be left scrambling for scraps. But this wasn't just a financial maneuver. It was a declaration of war. And as much as I hated to admit it, it was the wake-up call I needed. I had spent too long in the role of the wronged party, too long feeling helpless and victimized. But now I was done with that. I wasn't going to just stand by while Jason and Olivia carved out their future at my expense. I had a plan, and it wasn't just about reclaiming what was mine. It was about showing them that I wasn't someone they could push around. I was going to make them pay for every lie, every deceit, every little betrayal that had chipped away at the life I had known. The first step in my plan was to get as much information as I could. Sarah and I spent days sifting through the financial records Jason had left behind, looking for any more hidden accounts, any signs that there was more to this than he had let on. Every email, every bank statement, every transaction was a piece of the puzzle. The more we uncovered, the clearer it became that Jason had been planning this for months, if not longer. He had carefully crafted a life with Olivia, one that didn't include me. But I wasn't going to let him get away with it. Not after everything we had been through. The next step was legal. I couldn't just storm into Jason's life and demand what was rightfully mine. That would only lead to more problems, more conflict, and more frustration. Instead, I had to use the law to my advantage. We filed a motion to freeze his assets, to put a hold on the account he had been funneling money into, and to ensure that he couldn't hide anything else. It wasn't a full victory, not yet, but it was a start. It was the first blow in what was going to be a much larger battle. The hardest part of this whole process, however, wasn't the legal work. It wasn't even the hours of paperwork, the long phone calls with Sarah, or the hours spent on research. It was watching Jason continue to play his role as the loving husband to Olivia, pretending that everything was fine while I fought for my future. He didn't seem to care about the damage he had caused, the lives he had ruined. He was too busy enjoying his new life, his fresh start, to even consider the consequences of his actions. That's where the real pain came in. It wasn't that I wanted him back. It was that I wanted him to realize what he had done. I wanted him to feel the weight of his choices, to understand the devastation he had caused, and to realize that he couldn't just walk away from the wreckage he had left behind. But every time I saw him, every time I heard about him and Olivia, I felt the sting of that realization all over again. He had moved on. He had discarded me like an old possession, and now he was building a new life, one without me. But I wasn't going to let that happen without a fight. I had made peace with the fact that Jason would never be the man I had hoped he would be. But what I couldn't accept was the idea that he could get away with everything. He couldn't just destroy my life, take everything from me, and then waltz off into the sunset with Olivia. He needed to understand the consequences of his actions, and I was going to make sure he did. I spent hours working on my revenge plan, thinking through every possible angle, every detail. I wasn't going to just throw together something impulsive or reckless. No, this was going to be calculated, precise, and devastating. I wanted Jason to feel the full force of his betrayal, and I wanted Olivia to understand that her role in all of this wouldn't go unpunished. They thought they could outsmart me, take what was mine without facing any repercussions. But I had news for them, they were wrong. The plan began to take shape. I would continue to press forward with the legal battle, but I would also take advantage of the emotional leverage I had. Jason and Olivia didn't know it yet, but they were about to be blindsided. I had information on them that would turn the tables, information that would ruin everything they had worked so hard to build. But it wasn't just about taking them down. It was about showing them that I wasn't someone to be underestimated. I had a final piece of the puzzle, Olivia. She thought she had everything she wanted, but I knew she was just as vulnerable as Jason. She had her own secrets, things she had tried to keep hidden. And I was going to use those secrets to my advantage. I couldn't just hurt Jason. Olivia needed to feel the sting of betrayal too. She had taken something from me that I could never get back, and now it was her turn to pay. The moment arrived when I had everything in place. I had gathered enough evidence to take both of them down, but I knew that this had to be timed perfectly. I couldn't afford to make a mistake. It had to be executed in a way that would leave no room for escape, no way for them to wiggle out of the consequences. I had spent months preparing for this moment, and now it was time to strike. I set the trap, careful to cover every angle. The final blow came when I leaked the information to the press, making sure that Jason and Olivia would be forced to confront the consequences of their actions. The fallout was immediate, and it was everything I had hoped for. The press coverage was relentless, the legal repercussions severe. Jason and Olivia were forced to face the truth, and it was a truth that they could no longer escape. As I watched everything unfold, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. It wasn't about winning or losing. It was about taking back control of my life, my future. I had made them feel the pain they had caused me, and in doing so, I had freed myself from the chains of their betrayal. They had thought they could take everything from me, but in the end, it was I who had the last laugh. It wasn't just about the revenge anymore. As I watched the fallout from the information I had leaked to the press, I realized something profound. The satisfaction I thought I would feel from exposing Jason and Olivia's deceit was there, but it was muted by the complexity of the situation. This wasn't the kind of victory that filled you with joy. It was one of those victories that felt bittersweet, like winning a battle but knowing the cost was far too high. Still, there was a part of me that couldn't deny the sense of power that surged through me as I saw their world start to crumble. The press coverage had been explosive. Jason's carefully crafted public image, the one he had spent years building, had been shattered in an instant. The affair, the hidden accounts, the lies, it was all out there for everyone to see. His phone started ringing off the hook with calls from reporters, investors, and friends who suddenly wanted nothing to do with him. Olivia, too, found herself in the spotlight. She had been living in the shadows, thinking she could slide into Jason's life without consequence. But now, the world was watching her every move. The guilt that she had managed to bury so deep inside her was now visible on her face for everyone to see. For once, she was the one being scrutinized, and there was no escape. But what I didn't expect was how quickly the tides would turn. In the middle of all this chaos, when I thought I had the upper hand, something happened that caught me off guard. A phone call. It was from Jason's lawyer, someone I hadn't expected to hear from, and it came at the exact moment when I thought I had nothing left to fear. "I know what you've done, Emma." The lawyer's voice was cold, calculating. "But you should be careful. You're not as untouchable as you think you are." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. For a moment I froze. Was this the moment where everything I had worked for started to unravel? The lawyer continued, his voice laced with a threatening undertone. "You've made a serious mistake. We're going to count as you've crossed a line, and I promise you this isn't over." The lawyer's words lingered in the air, and my mind began to race. For a moment I couldn't think. I had been so focused on making Jason and Olivia pay for everything they had done to me, so focused on taking back control of my life, that I hadn't considered the possibility that they might retaliate in ways I hadn't anticipated. They weren't going to go down without a fight. The unexpected threat hung over me like a dark cloud. But it didn't shake me. It didn't scare me. If anything, it only fueled the fire inside me. I had come too far to back down now. I had spent too long building up my strength, pulling myself together after everything that had happened, to let a legal threat derail me. No, this wasn't the time for fear. It was the time to push forward, to take the next step in my plan. But what Jason didn't know was that I wasn't fighting this battle alone anymore. Sarah, my lawyer, had become more than just a legal advisor. She had become my ally, my confidant, someone I could trust completely. Together we had carefully calculated every move. We had prepared for every possibility, every potential setback. And even if they were going to countersue, we were ready. But the legal battle wasn't my only concern. In the days that followed, the emotional weight of everything I had done began to settle in. I wasn't just exposing their lies anymore. I was dismantling everything they had built. There was a part of me that had enjoyed seeing their world fall apart, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized something critical. I had become the very thing I hated. Jason had made me feel powerless, insignificant, as though I was nothing more than a footnote in his story. And in trying to reclaim my life, in trying to prove that I could be more than just his ex-wife, I had started to lose sight of who I was. I wasn't just fighting for revenge anymore. I was fighting for my sense of self, for my own dignity. But in doing so, I had become consumed by the need to hurt them. I had let their betrayal define me. One night as I sat alone in my living room reflecting on everything that had happened, I realized I was at a crossroads. I could continue down this path, let the bitterness and anger drive me to do things I might later regret, or I could take a step back and find a way to let go. I knew that I could never truly move on from everything they had done unless I made peace with myself. But how could I do that when everything I had worked for had been built on the desire for revenge? The next morning when I woke up, I made a decision. I was done fighting. Not in the way you might think, though. I wasn't going to stop the legal battle. I wasn't going to let Jason or Olivia get away with everything they had done. But I was going to let go of the anger. I wasn't going to let it control me anymore. I wasn't going to let them take away the one thing that I had left. My peace. The court proceedings continued, and with Sarah's expert guidance, we won a key ruling that gave me a stronger position in the case. Jason and Olivia were forced to face the full weight of their actions. But something unexpected happened during the final stages of the legal battle. Jason, broken by the public fallout, the loss of his business connections, and the pressure from the media, came to me. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even a gesture of reconciliation. It was a plea for mercy. "I didn't mean for it to go this far, Emma," Jason said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I never wanted to hurt you. But everything spiraled out of control. I made mistakes, and now I'm paying the price." It wasn't the words I had expected to hear from him. I had thought that when the time came I would find satisfaction in his downfall. But now as I looked into his eyes I realized something. His suffering wasn't what I had wanted. What I had wanted was justice, yes, but more than that, I had wanted him to understand what he had done. I wanted him to feel the weight of the choices he had made, not just for his own sake but for the sake of the family we had once been. "I know you didn't mean to hurt me, Jason," I replied, my voice calm and steady. "But you did. And now you have to face the consequences. Not just legally but personally. You can't keep running from what you've done." In that moment, I felt a sense of closure that I hadn't anticipated. Jason had been a part of my life for so long, and the pain he had caused me was something I had carried for far too long. But now as I looked at him I realized that I was finally free. Free from the bitterness. Free from the revenge that had consumed me. I didn't need him to apologize anymore. I didn't need him to fix anything. I had already done that for myself. As I walked away from the encounter, I realized that the revenge wasn't the victory I had thought it would be. The true victory was in the strength I had found within myself. In the process of tearing down everything Jason and Olivia had built, I had rebuilt myself. And in the end that was the only thing that truly mattered. The morning after Jason's plea was something of an awakening for me. I had no idea what I expected when I first set out on this journey of confrontation and vengeance. But in that quiet moment standing outside the courtroom it was clear, I wasn't the same person I had been when this all began. The rage and bitterness that had fueled my every move seemed to have quieted overnight. And though the battle was far from over, I could feel a shift inside myself. It wasn't peace, not yet. But it was something close to it. I watched as the world continued to react to Jason and Olivia's downfall. The media frenzy was relentless, and for the first time, Jason wasn't in control of the narrative. The public fallout was as explosive as I had hoped, but now as I watched it unfold, I felt something I hadn't anticipated: empathy. The reality of their lives falling apart didn't fill me with the satisfaction I thought it would. Instead, it made me reflect on everything I had lost in the process. Jason, Olivia. They weren't the only ones suffering. I was too. We all were. The legal proceedings continued, but something shifted inside me. As much as I wanted to see Jason held accountable, there was a part of me that started to feel sorry for him. He was unraveling before my eyes. His reputation was in tatters, his financial stability was hanging by a thread, and worst of all, he had lost the respect of our children. I could see it in their eyes whenever they spoke of him, how his absence weighed heavily on them, how the hollow shell of the man he had become left them wondering who he really was. The realization came slowly, like the rise of the sun after a long night. I had spent so much time seeking revenge, seeking validation for all the hurt and betrayal I had endured. But the truth was, I didn't need Jason to feel the consequences of his actions. His own choices had already torn him apart. And in that sense he was getting exactly what he deserved. I didn't need to be the one to administer the final blow. Life was doing that for me. That was the moment I knew. I didn't need to keep fighting him. I didn't need to prolong this war any longer. It was time to move on. Not for his sake but for mine. But the final twist came when I least expected it. In the midst of everything, I received an unexpected call. It was from Sarah, my lawyer. Her voice was calm, almost too calm as she spoke. Emma, I need you to sit down. I've just received some new information. It's about Jason and it changes everything. For a moment my heart raced. Had something new come to light? Had Jason tried to pull another fast one? I braced myself for whatever news was coming, but I never could have prepared for what Sarah said next. It's about the trust fund, she continued. The one Jason set up for the kids. The one we thought was just a regular savings plan. It turns out he's been funneling a portion of his earnings into it. But not for their benefit. My mind immediately went into overdrive. I couldn't breathe as I processed the implications. The money Jason had been hiding wasn't just for Olivia. It wasn't just for him. It was for something else entirely. Something that would have destroyed everything I had worked for if it had come to light sooner. Sarah explained further. Jason transferred a significant portion of his wealth to the kids' trust fund, but not with the intention of securing their future. He was using it as a bargaining chip. A way to control you, Emma. The plan was that once it was discovered, you'd be forced to accept his terms. His terms for settling the divorce, for splitting the assets, for everything. The betrayal took on a new shape. Jason had never truly planned to leave me empty-handed. He had been playing a game all along, using our children as pawns in a twisted strategy to manipulate me into accepting whatever deal he proposed. Does the money still exist? I asked, my voice steady but my heart racing. This was a game changer. If Jason had been hiding money in a trust fund, that meant he had been setting me up to fail all along. But there was a silver lining. He hadn't won yet. Not by a long shot. Sarah's response was as calm as ever. Yes, it exists. But now it's in your control. We can claim it. And with this new evidence, we can force a much more favorable settlement for you. The news hit me like a tidal wave. For the first time I realized how much power I had been given. I had been so focused on Jason's betrayal, on getting back at him for all he had done, that I had overlooked the one thing he never saw coming. His own greed and manipulation had left him vulnerable, and I had the leverage to turn the tables completely. I didn't waste time. The following weeks were filled with new paperwork, new meetings, and a renewed sense of purpose. The tables had turned. The narrative that Jason had been crafting for himself was no longer his to control. The truth was finally on my side, and now it was time to make him face the music. The court date arrived and I walked into the courtroom with my head held high. The strength I had built over the past months was undeniable. I wasn't the woman I had been when this all started. I wasn't the woman who cried herself to sleep, wondering if I would ever find peace again. I had found it not in revenge, not in watching Jason's life fall apart, but in reclaiming my power and my dignity. Jason sat across from me, a shadow of the man I had once known. His eyes, once filled with arrogance and entitlement, now betrayed fear. The same man who had thought he could control everything, who had tried to manipulate me and our children for his own gain, was now looking at me like I was the one in control. It was a moment of pure clarity. It wasn't about winning or losing anymore. It was about standing up for myself, for my children, for the future we would build without him. When the judge delivered the final ruling, it was clear. Everything Jason had tried to manipulate was being handed back to me. The trust fund was now in my name, as were the assets Jason had tried to claim. But more than that, the children's future was secure. I had fought not just for material wealth, but for the integrity of the family we once were. And in the end, it was that integrity that had been my greatest weapon. As I walked out of the courtroom that day, the weight that had once been so unbearable seemed to lift from my shoulders. I didn't feel victorious in the way I had imagined. I didn't need to feel that way anymore. The victory wasn't in the money or the assets. It was in the peace I had found. And in that peace I realized that true justice had been served, not just in the courtroom but in my heart.